They say that for preachers, the best sermon is the one they preach to themselves. Not about themselves, but to themselves. So today you get to hear one that I'm preaching to me. Let us pray. Wow. A glimpse of stillness to know you, oh God. Just a glimpse. Be in our hearing, our seeing, our touching, our tasting, and our knowing. That we truly become open and loving. Amen. I don't know about you, but lately I've been feeling like there's a bit of a cloud over Calgary these days. And I don't mean the weather, because obviously it's sunny. And it's cold. The coldest February since 1936, apparently. It is so cold that I got frostbite on my nose. We were sitting at a dinner table the other night, and Anna was trying to get my attention by going, I'm like, she goes, your nose. During the meal, it turned red. That's frostbite. She thought maybe it was wine or chocolate, but no, it was my nose. It was my nose. I have a tendency to be a sloppy eater. But it is a cold weather, and I don't know if it's getting to you and you're going crazy or whether you're absolutely delighted with the cold. I feel a sense of a cloud that's a little bit different over Calgary lately. And as you know, I am one who likes to have the newspaper in one hand, life text or a movie or an iPhone, a life text and a Bible together and say, how do they go together? Is there a connection? And the news these days has been kind of down. Who among us this past week with the SNC-Lavalin crisis, I'm not calling it a scandal, the crisis or controversy hasn't had themselves a little bit disturbed by what we have seen. Now, I happen to vote Liberal, just laying it out there. So it's been a little bit hard for me to see this, to hear about votes in Quebec or jobs in Ontario. And I finally go, okay, Alberta, I get a sense of what you've been talking about feeling left out. But that whole crisis has been in our news, whether we like it or not. Or if it's not that, you've been hearing about the President of the United States, a con man, a racist, and a cheat. And at first, when he was elected, we made fun of him, and there was a sense of humor. But now there's a sense of deep, deep sadness that the leader of that country is talked about in such a way, and perhaps is such a way, who knows? But there's that sense in which that whole conversation can weigh you down with time. The government institutions, we all say it's just politics, and yet politics is just people trying to sort out how we live together. So I am, as Jesus was, political in how I see politics matters and the kind of communities we create. Politics could be, should be, can be enlightening and indeed a service to a country. But okay, delete that one. You want to move to the church. The United Methodist Church in the United States, a mainline denomination with way bigger than the United Church of Canada, has been ripped apart this past week as they've been in a conference talking about LGBTQ issues. And now there's been policy set aside for the clergy that they can't be LGBTQ, and if they perform that kind of marriage, then they are shunned from the church and receive a penalty and are removed from service. And so there's been this huge tension from Sheena Trotter-Dennis and Pete and their family, who are United Methodists, and other United Methodists perhaps sitting among us. The struggle when your institution that you've had your whole life devoted to lets you down. And our institutions, all of them, schools, universities, businesses, governments, let us down at some point. And that's a deeply saddened situation when your institution has let you down as it has them this past week. Or perhaps your Catholic brothers and sisters, as we watch the Pope lead a conversation finally about sexual abuse, and many people saying, yeah, but too late and not enough. And perhaps there is truth to that as well. Or perhaps you're sitting beside someone this past week that was let go in their workplace, as we heard about Meg Energy, or Devon Energy, my son, or Ancana, where there's been layoffs and suddenly people that you worked with for years to disappear from a building. and that deep, deep cloud of sadness and sorrow and beginning to wonder who's next. That cloud in Calgary is real. Or maybe it's not the newspaper. You were listening this past week to CBC where the commentator was asking a woman, a police officer, who said, we can no longer be good Samaritans. Did you hear this story? As I heard this police officer saying, don't stop and help someone if they're in trouble. Now, she went on, the police officer, to say, in particular women, which I have to say, in some ways I say, yes, if you're by yourself and you're a woman, don't stop, but get help for someone, she was saying. But just think of the culture of disconnection we're living in, where we see someone in trouble, but we're told, don't help them in some way. Or it came to me most fully over French toast with my 8-year-old this week. When I said, what are you going to do today at school? And she said, it's lockdown day. Now, they've been doing this for a long time, but think about it. Kids going to school are going to practice lockdown. I said, why are you going to do that? And I knew the answer, but she said, well, somebody could have a gun or there could be gases in the air and we have to be getting out of the building. Now, I know this, we've been doing it, hey, but when your kid tells you that's what they're going to do at school today, what they're going to learn at school today is that the world is a dangerous place, which it is. There's something that broke my heart about her saying she's going off to school to learn about lockdown. I don't know about you, but this cloud's been big. And if you're feeling depressed today, I don't want to depress you even more. I understand depression. But I'm just saying there's a sense in which whether you have a personal cloud of a recent death in your family or a breaking of a relationship or a struggle with kids, the clouds gather and we're in one. In some ways, some people say, I'm not reading the paper and I'm not checking my phone and I'm not listening to the news. I'm just going to zone out. And I get that as long as we don't zone out forever and disconnect completely. But I believe we're living in an incredible time of this deep disconnection. We're living in a time right now where we are experiencing this disconnect, where we're told not to help somebody, where the news we have just disconnects us from institutions or even from each other, but also most fully from the land. From the land we're on. I don't know how many times I've been riding my bike lately and I come up behind somebody and I scare them because they're listening to something else. And I get this, my wife does it. I understand you do it. But the fact is we sometimes even disconnect from the earth we're walking on or the birds in the air or the water that's rushing past us. We disconnect completely even from the land or from others. We walk past them without looking at them or saying hello. I'm always surprised when you say hello and no one responds. But mostly disconnection from ourselves. This is the thing that's going on in my life right now. I feel deep connection from me. It comes fully alive at 3 a.m, almost like clockwork. When you wake up and suddenly you feel disconnected from the person you're sleeping beside or your job or your community, and the weight of those clouds comes upon us in the darkness because there's no other distractions, right? I believe this disconnection we're living with, all of us, I believe at some level is part of the challenge of living today, right now. And that's why people are so angry. That's why people are texting nasty things or showing hand signals to others around them, or saying things to put other people down. And this battle we're living in is disconnection. And that's why that phrase, hurt people, is so true. It's usually from our hurt, we want somebody else to also be hurt. I think, I wonder if we're living in a huge disconnect right now. And we catch glimpses of connection. But right now, it feels to me like there's clouds of disconnection. I want to show you what this looks like biblically or theologically. And this is dangerous because as soon as you put something up, it becomes static. But I want to show you this and walk you through this a little bit. And I want to say right off the bat, there's no such drawing you can draw to say what I'm going to try to say. But hang with me, if you will. This comes from Richard Rohr. If you type in Richard Rohr Homecoming, he'll explain it. But I like it. He's a Franciscan priest, the favorite theologian of mine right now. But I want to say something about it. He says the first circle here is It's how we come into the world. We come into the world with full innocence. We are just a baby. If you look at a baby and you see original blessing, innocence, unconscious, just beautiful, simple beings. And of course, then we have to move on in our life to the second drawing where there's a sense in which we create this disconnection. You see me there and God's over here, and sometimes we live in this, what we call first half of life, where we're all about our ego and all about accumulating and all about judgments and all about making our way in the world, and we disconnect from God in some ways. We kind of put God up there in a box so that we don't have to worry so much and do whatever we want, but there's this constant disconnection, connect and disconnect of that line. And why it's so important is in the first half of our life, that's normally what we do. That's just how you live. There's this connection, but there's a separation. And that line is the disconnection I'm talking about, where we disconnect from the sacred, disconnect from our sacred source, and that's who we are. It's a part of us that's just the way it is. It's our false self, if you will. If you move to the final diagram, it's a sense in which we move to our truest self, and you catch glimpses of this in your older life, like mine, and where you catch just a fleeting second where you feel you are connected to the sacred that's within you. So God isn't separate from you, but actually you get a moment when you connect to the sacred and God is inside you, a sense of your own love, your own beauty, your own truest self, where you're fully connected. And we catch only glimpses of this in our life. But also notice the word has changed to us. And that's because somebody left the sermon and said, take that slide out, I hate it. We talked about it, why. And he was helping me get that the us is so important. That if our religion is just about me and God, we got problems. Because the us means I'm going to honor the connection one to the other, that the divine lives in me, but also in you and you and you and you. And not just you, but in the reading you heard, Lucretia said it, but we didn't hear it. Nothing can separate us from God in all of creation. That means in the water, in the leaves, in the trees, in the rocks, in the animals and the people, all of creation, Paul is saying in those words. That God comes alive to us in that. No wonder if people say to me, I don't go to church, I go to the mountains. That's where I connect to God. I say, amen, right on, of course you do. Right? We have places that fill us up in creation, that speak to us in creation. Don't tell anybody, but I know you've had the experience where you've had a one-to-one with a leaf or a dog or a sunset, or the water, and you're fully alive in that moment. That's the God in us. That's your truest self. That's when you catch a glimpse of being wise. I don't mean like arrogant wise, but you know you don't know it all. You open your hands and surrender to what you don't know. And that final circle, I think, is so beautiful because it is both. The sacred beyond, the sacred within. It's me and you and us in a sacred web, I will call it. And it is ultimately a coming home. And you see, Jesus, if you were here last week, Jesus was all about the prodigal son story, about the fact that naturally we leave home. We all do. And naturally we stay home. And naturally we get to be the wise elder. And it is in that dance, that sacred dance, that we come home to ourselves. If you're scratching your head and you think, what's he talking about? You're quite right because you can't draw it. You simply come to know it in your spiritual journey. Richard would say this, that the contemplative mind, and he doesn't mean your brain, but the contemplative way is a long, loving look at the real. Do you have those moments? You all have them when you have that long, loving look at the real. It may be in creation. It may be in a person's eye. When you know that long, loving look at the real. Karl Rahner says this. He says, the Christian of the future will be mystic or no Christian at all. Don't say, oh gosh, what's gone on with John? He turned into a mystic. No, I'm just simply saying that the mystical speaks to each and every one of us in our life. Okay, so if that's that, I still say The biggest disconnect we're having is in this: we're not having good conversations. I get filled up by a good conversation. I get drained by bad ones. And I had a great one this past week with a friend who bought a friend. I didn't even know the other person, but in that conversation, my friend and his friend, the three of us got in a conversation that was real and deep and long, where we debated, where we discussed, where we laughed, where we were moved by the truth of the story. If you have somebody in your life you've had a real conversation with lately, are you one that encourages that kind of conversation? Are you and I able to listen in those conversations? That's often the best listening. So you see, the thing is that conversations can fill us up, or they can completely disconnect us. Some people will say, this is my favorite connector, my phone. And I'm not against the phone at all. It can save my life. But can it also totally disconnect me from other human beings? I read this week that what we desire is, although we may not say it, is face-to-face conversation. Face-to-face, where you're fully present, where you listen, where we learn in face-to-face empathy and joy and the other person's story. There are different kinds of conversations we have. Some are debates, and I don't mind debates. Let's watch a debate. Two different competitive voices. There's some who have a dialogue that's cooperative, two-way, back and forth. There's a third that's a discourse, a one-way, which I'm doing right now, I'm aware of, that I hope is cooperative. And there are others that are diatribes, and you know those diatribes. One-way, competitive, in your face. When you think of your conversation life, what kind of conversations are you a part of? So I think we're living in a time of disconnection, my friends. And I'm fully admitting to you, I feel disconnection. My dance in my entire life for 58 and a half years has been connect, disconnect, connect, disconnect, connect, disconnect. I know when I connect, and it's rich and beautiful, but I also know the loneliness of disconnection. The loneliness of that separation. So the thing I'm wondering about your church, we'll go to the next slide. Here's the way churches worked. Church historically has been, you believe something, you go to the United Church and they do communion that way, and then you belong, you sign up. But the way it is now, actually, in 2019, is this. The first thing, whether you know it or not, is that people are searching, seeking to belong. That we sense the disconnection in our life when we come to a place where we want to belong, feel like we belong to each other, to what's going on. Belong is first, and then you behave. You go, oh, this is the way they do things here. It may not be what I grew up with, but I like that. I never heard of that, but that's interesting. What are the ways the community gathers? And then the last is you figure out what you believe. It's a beautiful, radical shift I think we're living in, where churches have the potentiality to be places of belonging, where you may just get to know the 2 or 3 people near you, or maybe just the person that nodded and smiled to you when you had coffee, or you may enter into deep prayer life or conversation with other people. But this belong piece, I believe, is a potential for Hillhurst United Church. Whoever you are, wherever you're at, join us, is an invitation to also belong. You might choose to step back and say, not for me. But I want to challenge you to say the only way your spiritual journey is actually going to go deeper is if you step in and say, even to yourself, I'd like to belong more. Because there's so many opportunities on a Sunday, or this past week, a mentorship program. We're living in a world that's got lots of seniors, but not a lot of elders. And an elder is a different kind of mentoring relationship, one to another. Men and women sharing different places in life. What the great thing about the church is we're not the same, for goodness sakes, thank God. We're all different. We're all unique. We all have our own story. Or maybe it's tomorrow evening spiritual nurture, where you come to share. What is forgiveness? How's that worked in your life? What grudges are you hanging on to? What's holding you back? What's the power of unforgiveness that you carry around? Or what about food? A simple taste of this, or a lunch after. There's a guy that comes to this church, says, I come and I have to eat lunch at after church and I eat with somebody who looks a little bit different than me so that I can try to understand them and me better in conversation over food. It might be a Spark group. It might be a parenting group. It might be an LGBTQ gathering. It might be Thrive. It might be Pi. Who knows? But there's a shift when you say, I'm gonna step in and try to belong. And that disconnection that we all experience is a way in which this church could be a place of belonging. I don't know. But when I see the clouds out there, I wonder to myself, could this be a church of belonging? I want to read something for you because I want to come back to, remember I said Bible and newspaper? There's a section in the Globe that's called First Person. This past week was brilliant. It's called Special Delivery. I won't read it all. I did it at 9 o'clock. Somebody said that was the most disconnected sermon you ever had. Now, I don't change from 9, but it's different at 9. They help me. Oh boy, somebody ran out the door. But anyway, that's why we have 2 services. I get a second chance. Here's the story, and I let you go Google up Special Delivery, Globe and Mail. Story this past week about a woman who was dealing with depression and loneliness and anxiety and mental illness. And she was really feeling dark. She was stuck in her bed. And she decided to try something. She started to go to probably the most important place for her, the kitchen. And she started baking cookies. She baked the cookies and made up a little tag called #WinterLove. And then she bundled all these cookies up and she went around her small town, Elora, Ontario, Lisa Giraldi. I'm going to email her and tell her I talked about her today. And she delivered them to people. Get this, okay? She's in a struggle. She's low. She's depressed. She goes to what she knows. She bakes. Then she packages them up. And then she delivers them. What she doesn't believe is this: how many people, when they got them, came back to her and put something on her doorstep. And I'll read now. Somewhere along the way, #WinterLove began to shift. And things started showing up on my doorstep. After I delivered to them, someone got me a homemade mug, a pair of socks with tiny cookies, and muffins on them, homemade pesto, a jar of curried cauliflower soup, homemade candles, a loaf of bread, lemon curd, a gift certificate from a local bookstore, and even a tin of cookies. Every single one melted my heart. She's this awful place. She gives to somebody and they return. Melted my heart. But what really appreciated was how people began to share their own stories and experiences of mental health with me. There is no greater honor than to be trusted with the details of another person's life, especially when the details are messy, raw, and broken. I felt overwhelmed by the love and the care of my community. It humbled me that something so simple like cookies had sparked such an incredible kindness that was expanding well beyond my own life. It reminded me that there was good in me and my neighbors and the world. I recently delivered the final #WinterLove of the season. There was something bittersweet in it. I was shifting into a new season of light and of planting, of growing and business, while letting go of the season of winter of deep rumination, darkness, and love that had greatly shifted in my frame of mind. With each tin I delivered, I was reminded of different moments of people paying it forward, returning it to me, or sharing a little of their own story. What had begun as an attempt to alleviate my own darkness had been transformed into a story of more beautiful than I could ever have dreamed. It reminded me that there is a beauty in being broken, in being vulnerable, and in being kind. People are willing to share their stories when you trust them with yours. Life is tough all over. But there was a quiet strength in knowing you are not alone. Isn't that beautiful? How that connection was made for her and for me now. When I used to do teen confirmation, we would begin and end the sessions together, and we would say this, and I invite you to repeat after me. We belong to God. We seek to follow Jesus. We belong to each other. Amen. Join me in our final song.